a late-night bus ride, a stranger's head on his shoulder. She whispered, "I'm lost," and he felt the weight of her words. What happened in that quiet apartment would haunt him forever. The bus rattled along the empty highway, its engine humming a low, uneven drone that seemed to sync with the rhythm of my heartbeat. It was past midnight, and the world outside was a blur of dark fields and distant lights, smeared across the window like an abstract painting. I was 23, fresh out of college, working odd jobs to make rent in a small apartment on Carver Street in a nowhere town called Millhaven. My life felt like it was stuck in neutral, idling, waiting for something to shift gears. That night I was on the last bus from the city, heading back from a late shift at a warehouse job that paid just enough to keep me afloat. My hands smelled faintly of cardboard and machine oil, and my eyes burned from staring at inventory lists all evening. The bus was nearly empty, just a few scattered passengers hunched in their seats, faces lit by the soft glow of phones or hidden in the shadows of hoodies. I sat near the back, my backpack wedged between my knees, staring at the worn-out fabric of the seat in front of me. The air was stale, tinged with the scent of old upholstery and someone's forgotten coffee cup. I was half lost in thought, replaying the monotony of my day when the bus lurched to a stop at a small, dimly lit station just outside Millhaven. The doors hissed open, letting in a gust of cool night air, and she stepped on. Her name, I'd learn later, was Nora Fielding. She was tall, with a kind of quiet elegance that didn't need to announce itself. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping to frame her face, and she wore a long gray coat that looked slightly too big for her, as if it belonged to someone else. She was older than me, maybe late 30s, early 40s, though her face had a timeless quality, like she'd seen more than her years should allow. Her eyes, when they caught the light, were a deep hazel, sharp but tired, carrying a weight I couldn't name. She moved with purpose but also hesitation, clutching a small leather bag against her side as she scanned the seats. The driver muttered something about tickets, and she nodded, her voice too low for me to catch. She chose the seat across the aisle from me, settling in with a sigh that seemed to release something heavier than just the weight of the day. Her coat rustled as she adjusted it, and I noticed her hands, long fingers, no rings, nails clipped short but neat. I didn't mean to stare, but there was something about her that pulled my attention, like a painting you can't stop looking at even if you don't know why. I turned my head back to the window, pretending to focus on the dark, but my peripheral vision kept her in frame. The bus jolted forward, and we were moving again. The silence stretched, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional cough from a passenger up front. I tried to focus on my phone, scrolling through nothing in particular, but my eyes kept drifting to her reflection in the window. She was staring straight ahead, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her bag now resting on the seat beside her. There was a stillness to her, but it wasn't calm. It was the kind of stillness you see in someone holding themselves together, like a dam about to crack. I don't know why I spoke. Maybe it was the late hour, or the way the bus felt like a bubble outside of time, or maybe I just couldn't stand the quiet anymore. "Long night?" I asked, my voice sounding louder than I meant in the hush of the bus. She turned her head slowly, like she wasn't sure I was talking to her. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment I felt like I'd stepped into something I wasn't ready for. "You could say that," she said, her voice soft but clear, with a faint rasp that made it sound like she hadn't spoken in hours. "You?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool, though my pulse was inexplicably faster. "Just another shift, warehouse stuff, not exactly thrilling." She gave a small smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Sounds honest, at least. She paused, then added, I'm Nora. Elliot, I said, nodding. Elliot Warwick. Nice to meet you, Elliot Warwick. Her tone was polite, but there was a flicker of something else. Curiosity, maybe, or just exhaustion, looking for a distraction. She shifted slightly, her coat slipping off one shoulder, revealing a plain black sweater underneath. You live around here? Millhaven, I said. Renting a place on Carver Street. You? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. Just passing through, she said finally, her voice quieter now. I don't really stay anywhere long. I nodded, sensing I shouldn't push. There was a story there, but it wasn't mine to ask for. Not yet. The bus hit a bump, and her bag slid off the seat, landing with a soft thud on the floor. Without thinking, I leaned across the aisle to pick it up, my hand brushing hers as I handed it back. Her skin was cool, and the contact sent a jolt through me like static electricity, but deeper, more lingering. Our eyes met again, and for a split second, neither of us moved. Thanks, she said, pulling the bag back onto her lap. Her voice was steady, but her gaze lingered a moment too long, like she was trying to figure me out. No problem, I said, settling back into my seat, my heart thudding in a way I couldn't explain. I wasn't trying to flirt. I wasn't even sure I knew how with someone like her. She was older, sharper, carrying a kind of gravity I didn't know how to navigate. But there was something in the air now, a shift, like the moment you realize a song's tempo has changed. We didn't talk for a while after that. The bus rolled on, the highway stretching endlessly into the dark. I kept stealing glances at her, trying to be subtle. She was looking out her window now, her reflection ghostly against the glass. Her lips were pressed together, and every so often she'd shift in her seat like she was trying to outrun her own thoughts. I wondered what she was running from, or toward. I wondered why someone like her was on a night bus to nowhere, alone. The driver announced a stop at a gas station just outside Millhaven, a place called Redstone Fuel, with a flickering neon sign and a single pump that looked like it hadn't been cleaned in a decade. 15 minutes, he barked before stepping out to light a cigarette. Most of the passengers stayed put, but Nora stood, pulling her coat tighter around her. I need some air, she said almost to herself, and headed for the door. I don't know why I followed. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe I just didn't want to be alone with my thoughts either. Outside, the air was crisp, smelling of gasoline and damp asphalt. The gas station's lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows across the lot. Nora was standing near the edge of the pavement, her arms crossed, staring out at the fields beyond. The wind tugged at her hair, and she didn't seem to notice me approaching until I was a few feet away. Mind if I join you? I asked, shoving my hands in my pockets to keep them still. She glanced over, her expression unreadable. Free country, she said, but there was a hint of warmth in her voice, like she didn't mind the company. We stood there for a moment, the silence between us not quite awkward, but charged, like the air before a storm. You don't seem like the night bus type, I said, trying to keep it light. She let out a small laugh, sharp and brief. And you do? Fair point, I said, grinning despite myself. I guess we're both out of place. She didn't respond right away, just kept staring at the horizon, where the sky was a deep indigo, unbroken except for a few faint stars. Sometimes out of place is where you're supposed to be, she said finally, her voice so soft I almost missed it. I didn't know what to say to that. It felt like she was talking to herself as much as to me, and I didn't want to break whatever spell was holding her there. But then she turned, her eyes locking onto mine, and I felt that jolt again, stronger this time. "Why'd you get on this bus, Elliot?" she asked, her tone curious but pointed like she was testing me. "Work," I said, then added, "and maybe because I don't know where else to go." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Honest," she said. "I like that." We stood there a little longer, the wind picking up, carrying the faint sound of crickets from the fields. The driver called out that it was time to board, and Nora sighed, turning back toward the bus. I followed, my mind racing with questions I didn't dare ask. As we climbed back on, she paused at the top of the steps, her hand on the railing, and looked back at me. "You're not what I expected tonight," she said, her voice low, almost lost in the hum of the engine. Before I could respond, she moved to her seat, and I was left standing there, my heart pounding like I'd just run a mile. I sat down, my mind a tangle of thoughts, none of them clear. The bus started moving again, and Nora leaned her head against the window, her eyes closed. I thought she was asleep, but then she shifted, her head tilting toward me, resting lightly on my shoulder. "I'm lost," she whispered, so quietly I wasn't sure I'd heard her right. I froze, my breath catching. Her hair brushed against my neck, and I could feel the warmth of her through my jacket. I didn't move, didn't dare. The bus kept rolling, the night stretching on, and I sat there, wondering what the hell I'd stumbled into. This is only the beginning. You can't imagine what she'll do in a few hours. The bus swayed gently as it curved along the highway, the hum of the tires a steady undercurrent to the quiet that had settled between us. Nora's head was still on my shoulder, her breathing slow and even, but I couldn't tell if she was asleep or just resting, letting the moment stretch. Her words, "I'm lost," hung in the air like a melody I couldn't shake, soft and haunting. I sat rigid, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever fragile thing was holding us there. My shoulder ached from staying still, but I didn't care. Her warmth, the faint scent of her perfume, something like lavender and cedar, kept me anchored, my thoughts spinning in circles. I was 23, barely scraping by in Millhaven, a town that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. My days were a blur of warehouse shifts, cheap coffee, and a one-bedroom apartment on Carver Street with peeling paint and a leaky faucet I hadn't bothered to fix. Nora, though, she was different. She was older, probably pushing 40, though her face had a quiet beauty that made age seem irrelevant. There was a weight to her, not just in her eyes, but in the way she moved, like she was carrying a story she hadn't told anyone. I didn't know why she was on this bus, why she'd chosen to sit so close, but I felt like I was standing on the edge of something, and one wrong step could send me falling. The bus slowed, pulling into Millhaven's main station, a squat, concrete building with a flickering sign that read, "Greyhound Stop," in faded letters. The driver's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing the end of the line. Nora stirred, lifting her head, and I felt the absence of her weight like a sudden chill. She blinked, her eyes catching mine for a moment before she looked away, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Did I fall asleep?" she asked, her voice low, almost embarrassed. "Nah, just resting," I said, trying to sound casual, though my heart was still racing. "We're here, Millhaven." She nodded, glancing out the window at the empty lot, lit by a single street lamp that buzzed like an angry insect. "Right," she said, her tone flat, like she wasn't sure what came next. She grabbed her bag, standing slowly, her coat slipping off one shoulder again. I noticed a small tear near the hem, barely visible, but it made her seem more real, less like a figure from a dream. I stood too, slinging my backpack over one shoulder. The other passengers were already shuffling off, their footsteps echoing in the quiet. Nora hesitated at the aisle, her fingers tightening around her bag's strap. "You live close?" she asked, not looking at me. "Yeah, a few blocks," I said. "Carver Street. You got a place to stay?" She gave a small, tired smile, the kind that said she'd heard that question before. "Not really," she said. "There's a motel nearby, I think. Blue Sail, something like that." The Blue Sail Motel was on Route 17, a run-down place with peeling paint and a neon sign that flickered more than it glowed. I'd passed it 100 times, never thinking much of it, but the idea of Nora staying there alone made my stomach twist. "It's not exactly 5-star, I said, scratching the back of my neck. "You sure you're good there?" She shrugged, her eyes meeting mine again, and there was that jolt, that same electric pull I'd felt before. "I've stayed in worse," she said, but her voice was softer now, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. We stepped off the bus into the cool night air, the station lot smelling of diesel and wet pavement. The other passengers had already scattered, leaving just the two of us under the street lamp's harsh glow. Nora pulled her coat tighter, her breath visible in the chilly air. I should have said good night, let her go, but something kept me rooted there, like the night wasn't done with us yet. "You know the way to the motel?" I asked, shoving my hands in my pockets to keep them still. She glanced down the road, her expression unreadable. "I'll figure it out," she said, but there was a hesitation in her voice, a crack in her usual composure. She took a step, then stopped, turning back to me. "You don't have to, but would you mind walking with me? Just to the motel. It's late." My pulse kicked up again, but I nodded, trying to keep my face neutral. "Yeah, sure. It's not far." We started walking, the crunch of gravel under our shoes the only sound for a while. Millhaven was quiet at this hour, the streets empty except for the occasional car passing by, its headlights cutting through the dark. The Blue Sail was about a mile down Route 17, past a shuttered diner and a gas station called Redstone Fuel, where we'd stopped earlier. Nora walked with her head down, her bag clutched against her side, and I kept pace beside her, stealing glances when I thought she wouldn't notice. "You don't talk much, do you?" she said after a few minutes, her tone light but curious. I laughed, caught off guard. "Guess I'm not used to night bus conversations." She smiled, a real one this time, and it lit up her face in a way that made my chest tighten. "Fair enough," she said, "but you're easy to talk to, Elliot Warwick. That's rare." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just shrugged, my cheeks warming despite the cold. "You're not so bad yourself," I said, and she laughed, a soft, throaty sound that made the night feel less empty. We passed the diner, its windows dark, the sign reading Maggie's Place barely legible in the moonlight. Nora slowed, her gaze lingering on the building. "Places like this always make me think of home," she said almost to herself. "Not that I've had one in a while." I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words felt too heavy, too intrusive. Instead, I said, "Millhaven's not much, but it's got its charm. If you like quiet anyway." "Quiet's not so bad," she said, her voice soft again. "Sometimes it's what you need." We kept walking, the motel's neon sign coming into view, flickering blue and pink against the sky. The Blue Sail was as rough as I remembered. Peeling paint, cracked pavement, a vending machine that looked like it hadn't worked in years. Nora stopped at the edge of the lot, staring at the motel like it was a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. "Looks cozy," she said, her tone dry, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Yeah, real homey," I said. "You sure you're okay here?" She turned to me, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment I thought she might say something real, something that would change the air between us. But then she just nodded. "I'll manage," she said. "Thanks for the escort, Elliot." I nodded back, my throat tight. "Anytime?" She started toward the motel office, then paused, turning back. "You're not what I expected either," she said, echoing her words from the bus. "Good night, Elliot." "Good night, Nora," I said, watching as she disappeared into the office, the glass door swinging shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, the night pressing in around me, my mind replaying every word, every glance. I should have walked away, gone home to my apartment, but something kept me there, staring at the motel's flickering sign. I finally turned to leave, my footsteps heavy on the pavement. But then I heard the door open again, and Nora's voice called out, soft but clear. "Elliot, wait." I turned, my heart thudding. Yeah, she was standing in the doorway, her bag still clutched against her side, her coat open now, revealing the black sweater and a sliver of collarbone that caught the light. "The office is closed," she said, her voice steady, but with an edge of something else. Frustration, maybe, or fear. "No one's here. I don't know what to do." I took a step closer, my mind racing. "It's past midnight," I said. "They probably lock up early. You got anywhere else to go?" She shook her head, her lips pressing together. "Not really," she said. And there was that crack again, that glimpse of vulnerability that made my chest ache. I don't know why I said it. Maybe it was the late hour, or the way her eyes looked in the neon light, or maybe I just couldn't stand the thought of her standing there alone. "My place isn't far," I said, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "It's not much, but there's a couch. You can crash there, figure things out in the morning." Her eyes widened slightly, and for a moment I thought she'd say no, that she'd rather take her chances with the motel. But then she nodded, slow and deliberate. "Okay," she said, "just for tonight." We walked back to Carver Street in silence, the night wrapping around us like a blanket. My apartment was in a small complex called Willow Grove, a 3-story building with creaky stairs and a faint smell of mildew. I unlocked the door to my Unit 2B and flipped on the light, revealing a cluttered living room with a sagging couch, a coffee table covered in takeout containers, and a TV that hadn't worked in months. "It's not the blue sail," I said, trying to joke, but my voice sounded nervous even to me. Nora stepped inside, her eyes scanning the room. "It's fine," she said, setting her bag on the floor. "Better than the bus." I grabbed a spare blanket from the closet, tossing it onto the couch. "You can take this," I said. "I'll be in the bedroom. Kitchen's through there if you need water or anything." She nodded, sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands folded in her lap. "Thank you, Elliot," she said, and the way she said my name made my stomach flip. "I mean it." "No problem," I said, backing toward my room, my heart pounding like I was 16 again. I closed the door behind me, leaning against it, trying to steady my breathing. She was just a stranger, I told myself, just someone who needed a place to crash. But the way her eyes had lingered on mine, the way her voice had softened, it felt like more than that, like we were already past the point of strangers. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds of her moving in the living room, the creak of the couch, the rustle of her coat. I wondered what she was thinking, what had brought her here, to a nowhere town and a stranger's apartment. I wondered why I cared so much. What she says next will change everything. For her and for me. The morning light slipped through the cracked blinds of my apartment, casting thin stripes across the living room floor. I'd barely slept, my mind caught in a loop of Nora's voice, her whispered "I'm lost," echoing like a song I couldn't stop humming. I was 23, living in a rundown place on Carver Street in Millhaven, working dead-end jobs and wondering if this was all life had for me. But last night something had shifted. Nora Fielding, a woman I'd met on a night bus, was now on my couch, her presence filling the small space with a weight I couldn't ignore. She was older, late 30s, maybe 40, her dark hair and sharp hazel eyes carrying a story I hadn't dared to ask about. Yet here she was, in my world, and I was in hers, whether I meant to be or not. I crept out of my bedroom, trying not to wake her. The living room was quiet, the blanket I'd given her folded neatly on the couch, her coat draped over the armrest. Her leather bag sat on the floor, a small private thing that seemed to hold more than just her belongings. She wasn't there. For a moment, panic gripped me. Had she left? But then I heard the soft clink of a mug from the kitchen, and my shoulders relaxed. I found her standing by the counter, holding a chipped mug of coffee I'd left in the pot the day before. She'd reheated it, the faint smell of burnt grounds mixing with the morning air. Her hair was loose now, falling past her shoulders, and she wore the same black sweater from last night, the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. She looked up as I entered, her expression unreadable but softer than before, like the edges of her had softened overnight. "Morning," I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. "Hope the couch wasn't too bad." She smiled, a small, genuine curve of her lips. "It was fine, Elliot. Thanks." She lifted the mug slightly. "I hope you don't mind. I needed something to wake me up." "Nah, help yourself," I said, leaning against the doorway, trying to act casual, though my heart was doing that stupid thudding thing again. "I don't have much, but there's some bread if you're hungry. Maybe some peanut butter, if it's not expired." She laughed, a low, warm sound that made the cramped kitchen feel less empty. "I'm okay," she said. "Coffee's enough for now." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of the mug. "You didn't have to let me stay, you know. Most people wouldn't." I shrugged, looking at the floor to avoid her eyes. "Didn't feel right leaving you at the motel. Besides, it's just a couch." "It's more than that," she said quietly, and when I looked up, her gaze was steady, pinning me in place. There was that jolt again, that electric pull that made my skin feel too tight. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, grabbing a mug for myself and pouring the last of the coffee, mostly to have something to do with my hands. We stood there in silence for a moment, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge and the distant rumble of a car on Carver Street. I wanted to ask her everything, where she was from, why she was here, what she meant when she said she was lost. But the words felt too big, too heavy for the morning light. She spoke first, her voice soft but deliberate. "I'm not good at staying in one place, Elliot. Never have been." She looked down at her mug, her fingers tightening around it. "But last night, I don't know. It felt different." I swallowed, my throat dry despite the coffee. "Different how?" She hesitated, her eyes flicking up to meet mine, and for a moment I saw something raw in them. Something that looked like fear, or maybe longing. "Like I wasn't just passing through," she said. "Like I could stop, even just for a minute." My heart was pounding now, loud enough I was sure she could hear it. I set my mug down, the clink loud in the quiet. "You don't have to keep moving," I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. "Not if you don't want to." Her lips parted like she was about to say something, but then she looked away, her shoulders tensing. "You don't know me, Elliot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't know what I'm running from." "Then tell me," I said, taking a step closer, close enough to see the faint lines around her eyes, the way her breath hitched. "I'm here. I'm listening." She shook her head, a small, almost desperate movement. "It's not that simple," she said. I'm not someone you should get tangled up with." I didn't know what she meant, but the way she said it, the weight, the warning, made my chest ache. "Maybe I'm already tangled," I said, my voice quieter now, more honest than I meant it to be. Her eyes snapped back to mine, wide and searching, and for a moment the kitchen felt too small, the air too thick. She set her mug down, her movements slow, deliberate, like she was trying to keep herself steady. "You're young," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You've got a whole life ahead of you. Don't waste it on someone like me." "Someone like you?" I echoed, frustration creeping into my voice. "What does that even mean, Nora? You're here in my kitchen drinking my terrible coffee. That's real. That's not a waste." She laughed, but it was sharp, almost painful. "You're sweet, Elliot, too sweet." She took a step back, her hands clasping together like she was trying to hold herself together. "I'm 42. I've got a past that's heavier than you can imagine. You don't need that." 42. The number landed like a stone, not because it shocked me, but because it made her real in a way I hadn't expected. She was older, yes, but it wasn't just years. It was the way she carried them, like a coat she couldn't take off. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but the look in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't just doubt. It was fear, like she was afraid of what might happen if she let herself believe me. "I don't care about your past," I said finally, my voice low. "I care about right now." She stared at me, her breath uneven, and I could see the battle in her eyes, wanting to stay, wanting to run. I took another step closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth of her, smell the faint lavender of her perfume. Her eyes flicked down to my lips, then back up, and for a moment I thought she might lean in, might close the distance. But then she turned away, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. "I should go," she said, her voice barely audible. "I need to figure out something." "Don't," I said, the word slipping out before I could stop it. I reached out, my hand brushing her arm, and she froze, her breath catching. Her skin was warm under my fingers, and I felt that jolt again, stronger now, like a current running through me. "Nora, just stay. For a little while." She didn't pull away, but she didn't turn back either. Her head was bowed, her hair falling forward to hide her face. "You don't know what you're asking," she said, her voice trembling now. I'm not someone who gets to stay." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know how to tell her that I saw her, not just the woman on the bus or the stranger on my couch, but the person she was trying so hard to hide. I didn't know how to say that I was scared too, that I was 23 and lost in my own way, but that standing here with her felt like the first real thing I'd felt in months. "Then let me come with you," I said, my voice steady despite the chaos in my chest. "Wherever you're going. Just don't disappear." She turned then, her eyes wet and for the first time I saw her without the walls she'd built. She looked younger, more vulnerable, like the weight she carried had slipped just enough to let her breathe. "Elliot," she said, my name soft on her lips, like a prayer she wasn't sure she believed in. "You can't fix me." "I'm not trying to," I said, my hand still on her arm, my thumb brushing against her skin. "I just want to be here." She closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek, and I felt my heart break and mend in the same moment. She stepped closer, her hand coming up to rest against my chest, not pushing me away, but holding me there, like she was testing the weight of it. "This is a mistake," she whispered, but she didn't move away. "Maybe," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but it's ours." Her eyes opened, locking onto mine, and the world narrowed to just us, the kitchen, the morning light. She leaned in, her forehead resting against mine, her breath warm against my lips. I could feel her trembling, or maybe it was me, and for a moment I thought she might kiss me, might let go of whatever was holding her back. But then she pulled back, her hand dropping to her side, her expression a mix of longing and resolve. "I can't," she said, her voice breaking. "Not because I don't want to, because I do. Too much." I nodded, my throat tight, my hand falling away from her arm. "Okay," I said, because what else could I say? I wanted to fight for her, to tell her she was wrong, but I saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't saying no to me. She was saying no to herself. She grabbed her bag and coat, moving quickly now, like she was afraid she'd change her mind. "I'll find a way to thank you," she said, pausing at the door. "For last night. For this." "You don't owe me anything," I said, but she was already opening the door, the morning air rushing in cold and sharp. She looked back one last time, her eyes holding mine, and I saw everything she didn't say, everything she wanted to, everything she couldn't. "Take care, Elliot Warwick," she said, her voice soft but final. And then she was gone, the door clicking shut behind her, leaving me standing in the kitchen with a cold mug of coffee and a heart that felt too big for my chest. I walked to the window, watching her figure disappear down Carver Street, her coat billowing in the wind. I didn't know where she was going, or if I'd ever see her again, but something had changed in me, something I couldn't name. She'd left a mark, not just on my couch or my morning, but on the part of me that had been drifting, waiting for something to matter. I stood there for a long time, the light shifting across the floor, the world outside waking up. And as I turned away from the window, I felt it, a quiet, aching certainty that I'd carry her with me, always,